Hello. We discussed already in a previous video how electrons from NADH find their way to Q. Now, what about the other electrons that are on FADH? How do they find their way to Q? So that happens through complex 2. Okay. So complex 2, in this fundamental reaction, we have succinate that becomes fumarate, and the electrons from ubiquinone, the electrons will land onto ubiquinone and become ubiquinol. And we saw this reaction in the TCA cycle. Um, the This reaction in complex 2, we do not have proton movement, so that's why actually these electrons are considered lower energy, okay, because they don't charge the yield. Is not They're not electrons that come through FADH ultimately will charge the membrane less because they skip complex 1, which, as we saw, can move 4 protons across the membrane. So any electrons that come through FADH will skip complex 1, and those protons will not be calculated to the net proton movement. So you charge your battery less, and you're going to get less ATP in the end. The way the reaction works, as we had seen, in the TCA cycle, you've seen this slide before. Succinate is converted to fumarate, and that generates FADH2. Okay, so the electrons find their way onto FADH2, and then they get passed on to other components of the electron transport chain until they find their way into Q, which again, Q, remember, is in the lipid bilayer of the inner mitochondrial membrane. It's a smaller complex, but it is significant. So we have the usual players again. We have flavin nucleotide, the flavin cofactors. We have iron sulfur clusters, hemes, and of course Q, okay, which is the ultimate goal here, to pass the electrons onto Q to become ubiquinol. If you see from complex 1 and complex 2 what we have discussed, I mean, we are here, both of them move the electrons to Q, and you see the redox status, the E values, the electron potential of these various cofactors. We have NADH for complex 1, and FAD and all the other flavin components are more positive. Iron sulfur clusters even more positive, and Q even more positive. So you can see how, based on the electron, on the E values here of all these cofactors, how the electrons they are thermodynamically feasible and favorable to funnel these electrons all the way into Q. And of course, eventually then from Q, as we see, it's also very thermodynamically favorable to finally, through these steps, to find a way onto oxygen, based again on a simple lining up of put them in order and sequence the different E values for all these redox reactions. Disease mutations are actually quite common in complex 2, because common meaning you can have patients that are live and you can see them. So they're not as lethal as with the other complexes, and they exist. And in this case, they exist even on the complex itself, unlike the case for complex 1, where most of the mutations are actually in the assembly pathway, how to put together. Here with complex 2, you find specific mutations on the actual complex itself, and they tend to cluster in 3 different groups, but they exist, and they are significant. And and you see they're really close to all the various electron transfer cofactors like iron sulfur clusters and hemes. All right, so that summarizes a few things, really simple things about complex 2. So now at the stage where we are is that we have Q, which is reduced in the ubiquinol. It's embedded in the lipid bilayer of the inner mitochondrial membrane. And the rest of the videos, we're going to see how from Q we go to complex 3, cytochrome C, and then complex 4 to finally reach the destination of these electrons onto oxygen. So we'll stop here.